I laid in my bed just in awe and could not believe that we did what we did, which was nothing really, but just waited there. And then God proved himself to me at that point. And so I said, all right, God, you win. And little do I know that at the time it was probably not the thing to do to challenge God to come to Christ, but he called me out on it.
This is The Calling, a Family Life original podcast hosted by Steve Smith that features conversations with pastors who share about the triumphs and challenges they face in their personal and professional lives as they share the gospel. Our guest for episode 23 is Pastor Rick Schmieg of First Presbyterian Church in Montrose, Pennsylvania.
Pastor Rick, I always like the stories of how you got to where you are today, because every time I talk to a pastor, it seemingly is a different story every single time. So the Pastor Rick story, you don't have to go into every single detail, but what journey has God brought you on to today?
So I'll give you the Cliff Note version of the Reader's Digest version of this story, because it's quite long. So I'm like probably a lot of pastors. I would say that, 40 years ago, if you said that I would be here today, I would seriously consider a psychiatric evaluation for your opinions, because there's no way. I grew up in a Catholic church setting. My father and mother always made sure we got there every week. But honestly, being kind of a sullen teenager, I didn't really get much out of it other than probably three things. That God exists, that getting to heaven was more about being how you followed the Catholic rituals rather than anything else, and that there would be some serious consequences if you considered eating a hamburger on a Friday in Lent. So those are what I got out of the Catholic Church. And then, so after high school, actually, if you asked me what I wanted to be, I would have told you I would have been in radio broadcasting, because I actually had a heart for that. And I love to listen to, the famous people like Casey Kasem and Rick Dees and Dick Clark and all those major broadcasters. And I did very well in like music courses in high school, music, singing and playing the horn. I made district festivals in that aspect. But as far as a career, I really didn't know after high school what I was going to do specifically. Other than a love of radio. I used to have radios in my room. I used to have CB radios in our car, if you remember those from back in the day. But so I joined the military when I got out of high school in 1987. My first couple weeks of boot camp were, for myself personally, being physically challenged, able to do things. I was not a very healthy kid. I was quite overweight. And I still believed the rhetoric that my Navy recruiter told me that, anyone can pass a physical fitness test. Yeah, I didn't. That proved more untrue than anything. So my first week of boot camp, we were allowed to go to church services, and feeling as kind of alone as I was at that time, I went to the Catholic services, and to this day, I couldn't tell you what the guy preached on or what even occurred during that entire service, but I knew there was something down in me that felt a real sense of relief and comfort in that. So I went through boot camp. I successfully made it through boot camp eventually. I believe God had his hand in that. Then I went on to my couple of A schools. So I went on to I was stationed on a LST, which is a tank landing ship that Navy doesn't have anymore, on USS Spartanburg County when we were out of Little Creek, Virginia. And I did my duty there. I wasn't really assigned to anything specifically for the first couple of years, just doing ship work and helmsman and watches, things like that. I finally got myself under wraps and got a fire under my belly and made it to where I finally became for lack of a better term, a postal clerk, which led me to be the headmaster of the post office of the ship. And this was by like my third year in the service. So I had one more year. I figured this was the time that was going to be, my time. I can finally relax and take things down a little bit. And in the last 2 years or so, I would kind of go to church when I can. Of course, being deployed, it was more of a difficult thing, but it wasn't really as much of a priority as it probably should have been. Then shortly after I received my promotion, and this would have been August of 1990, we got the word that Saddam Hussein had gone into Iraq and taken it over for himself. And then standby, we would probably be deployed to, at that time, it was Operation Desert Shield. And sure enough, within a couple of weeks, we were on our way over there. And we sailed there. It was pretty much business as usual as far as life of a Navy sailor. Getting over there it took us about, I think, 2 months to sail from Norfolk over there, and we were positioned outside of the Persian Gulf at the time, and we would do our training exercises just like we normally did. And for those of you who remember your history in that conflict, our president and much of NATO allies said the same thing. We were giving Saddam Hussein until January 15th to pull out, or else all the troops that had been mustered to that area would have come in and taken it back over anyway. And it really didn't really focus onto my life until the January 14th, when our captain called us all together and told us that tomorrow was going to be the day and that we were going to be going in. And of course, we have to take all of the realities of that in his description when he described that we would be going into what was presumed to be a minefield. And anywhere we sailed, there could have been a mine. Of course, there were small boat terrorists that would come at us rather quickly if we were to, and so we make sure we would be ready for them. And our mission was to go in, sail halfway up the coast and beach. Well, in LST, you can actually beach the boat and open up the front, and the Marine troops that we were carrying would be deployed to resume the effects of cleaning out Iraq from the Saudis there. So it was that moment that, of course, the captain, after he said all of that, said, well, we're going to, try to get a good night's rest because we don't know when the alarms are going to go off and when we're going to be going in. So now at this point, I was about 22 years old and, for lack of a better term, scared sightless. I couldn't think hide or hair of what would happen. We had already been over there about 6 months, and I hadn't seen my family through Thanksgiving or Christmas or any of the major holidays. And the thoughts of that were going through my head were, would I ever actually see them again? But not that we weren't trained to be able to do that, but there's always that possibility. So it was that night that I went into my post office and I did something that I hadn't done in probably a long time. Seriously, I prayed. And I prayed to God and I was openly and honest with him. I said, Lord, I know you know that I am on the fence as far as whether you actually exist or not. But I know there's not only for myself, but all these people here that have families back home. And if you could see it in your will to bring us all home safely, then I will be convinced that you exist and I will follow you wherever you want me to go. So then we went to sleep, with kind of one eye opened, but not too badly, considering the days before. But then we woke up the next morning and nothing happened. We had no alarms going off. We had no sirens. We had no orders to go in. And we all just kind of waited around for a day. And within a couple of days, the captain called us out and said, well, the ground offensive is going very well. People don't seem to be fighting us. They're clearing everything out, and we're just waiting here on standby. And then a couple of days after that, we were told that the ground troops were doing their thing. There was no need for us to go in. We could turn around and go home. And within between the time the Desert Storm took place, which was on the 15th, and that time, it was about 4 weeks. And it took us another 2 weeks to go home, and we did. And the reception we received was incredible. And all the yellow ribbons that the world was promoting to put up in support of our troops were clearly seen. And my parents and my family met me on the pier when I got there, and I was able to take some time off and go home with them, which I did. And it was at that time that I about a 10-hour drive from Norfolk to Towanda, where we lived. And I laid in my bed just in awe and could not believe that we did what we did, which was nothing really, but just waited there. And then God proved himself to me at that point. And so I said, all right, God, you win. And little do I know that at the time it was probably not the thing to do to challenge God to come to Christ, but he called me out on it. And that was at that point. So I was still had a couple more months in the service, and I was discharged in July honorably, came home and started attending the church that my wife was going to. And about a year, and I did Sunday school and did what I could there to help them out. And about a year into going there, maybe 2 years, I had to fill in for a pastor. A pastor had an emergency that day and needed someone to fill the pulpit. So I put together what I thought was a sermon at the time and went up and preached the word. And I can't remember again what I preached on at that time. And everyone seemed to really enjoy what I did. And when the pastor came back, he said that there was a lay ministry course available through the denomination that I would, if I was interested in, I would be a suitable candidate for. But at that time, we had just had our first kid, and I really didn't see myself being able to do that effectively. So I kind of put it on the back burner. Well, three kids, and 20 years later, the opportunity came for me again to do the lay ministry course, and I jumped on it. Did that and completed that in 2022. And my goal for doing that course was really just the seeing the need for the small churches that couldn't either afford a pastor full-time or even part-time and just needed pulpit supply. So I did that for about a year and a half or so. And then when I got a call in July of 2023 to be a per diem minister for the First Presbyterian Church of Troy. And I did that I started to do that, and I filled in for churches here and there in that time frame as well. And it was really the only job that I've really ever felt that I've come out feeling better than I did going in. Preaching God's word and speaking to the people and letting the Lord show his light to everybody. It really brought me a sense of accomplishment and a sense of peace. Now, focus that on my other job that I had. I worked for 32 years as a route salesman. Jumping on and off of trucks and delivering snack foods to certain accounts. And that really provided well for my family for so long. But at the same time I was doing the per diem work for Troy, I was noticing that my body in its physical midlife sense was not up to the task of doing work so laborious as it was. I was coming home very tired, very sore. And by the time I would go to sleep and the pain that would finally subside where I would get some sleep, it'd be 15 minutes later, I'd be up and doing it all again. So I said, well, Lord, maybe this is a time where I need to really put my heart in to serve you a little more. And so I put my name out there a little bit for anyone looking for a full-time ministry, for a full-time minister. And our denomination allows lay ministers to do that if the need arises. I received a note from the First Presbyterian Church in Montrose, and long story short, they decided to carry me on. I've been there since the first part of 2024, and I've been there ever since. And not only is my body more at ease, but my mind and my soul is more at ease. I have never had a job that has been more fulfilling and more satisfying to me, and seeing how the Lord is working in the lives of others as he has worked in me over the last 50-some years.
Talking with Pastor Rick Schmieg of First Presbyterian Church of Montrose, and I had a note written down here that I wanted to touch on, and I think you can speak to it because you spoke to it in your description of how your journey is. I have a term that I've heard recently called Christian-ish, I-S-H, Christian-ish, like the difference between being Christian-ish and a fully devoted follower of Jesus. And you can probably speak to that, can't you? Someone who was kind of half in, half out, and now fully devoted. Just talk about that a little bit, the difference in your life.
Well, I mean, there's definitely a difference in how I see things and how I approach different things. Christian-ish, I can see that. I don't see, how do I want to word this? I think we're all kind of Christian-ish a lot. It's just if you were going to put us on a scale of 1 to 10, how ish we are, I guess. If we're more followers of Jesus, more devoted in a lot of things and maybe not in some things, whereas some are just like, well, I know God is there, but I'm not so sure, he's right for me, or however you want to describe that. So I can see how that is, and I try to see that in everybody, only because I know there is only one perfect person, and God is the only perfect person we have. So of course we have his example, and with that example, if you really look at it, we see how faulty we are and how close we are not to living a life as Jesus gave us. So I'm thankful that Jesus did what he did for us, because that covers the open part of the ish, I guess, getting us closer to him.
I also heard
for some it's a little, for some it's a lot, and it's either way it all equates.
I heard a description recently of actually a pastor giving a description of being a pastor, and certainly there can be more. There are a lot more details in it than this, but they describe their job as they get up and preach the word is to comfort the afflicted, but also to afflict those who are too comfortable, which is what the word does anyway, I suppose. But what are your thoughts on that as you prepare your messages, every week? Talk about comforting the afflicted and afflicting those who just get a little bit too comfy.
Yeah, so I think we need to be awoken. My grammar is terrible. Wakened up in that in that aspect of things, to where we need to get uncomfortable sometimes, because a lot of people will see us just as we are and not as what we feel is right or what we believe in. People see us a lot from what we are on the outside, rather than really getting to know us what we are like on the inside, and why is it that we do the things that we do. So I like to try to challenge people to be better and closer to Christ. And I like to make them think sometimes, and I hate to use this as a reference as being a pastor, but being the devil's advocate, trying to, I always said, people ask me now, well, how do you think now that you've done your first year at your first church full time? And I say, well, they haven't come at me with torches and pitchforks yet, but I'm waiting for them to sharpen the tongs.
Yeah.
So just to get them a little bit, to get them off their seat and to get them going. But I mean, my congregation is great. They put their heart and soul into everything they do, and I couldn't have asked for a better congregation to be transitioned into doing this full time.
You talk about a great congregation, but also, I think most anybody in their position, and you have the up front position, you're in the pulpit and you're out front. So many people behind the scenes and a staff, and you can't be great without great people around you. And I'm sure you've learned that in your first year, probably, huh?
I have. I have an associate pastor. You might know him, Pastor Google. He helps me out quite a bit. But yeah, we have, people that have been there for years, that know more about who and what of their congregation, and helped me out a lot about trying to know everybody and know their background. And yeah, so they're a very strong rock to my steeple.
Is there someone who you already talked about growing up in the Catholic Church, but even currently in other pastors, any people that have really been a huge spiritual influence and maybe continue to be a huge spiritual influence in your life?
Well, I'll give credit to the minister that put me onto this lay ministry course in the first place, way back in 1990 something. His name was Roger Griffith. He was also a lay minister. He actually became a reverend in his studies. I haven't made it to that point yet, but he was an inspiration as far as getting us there. And my sister, who has been a rock through all of everything that she's gone through, she's been kind of a faithful support of everything that I've done too. And of course, my family, my wife and my 3 kids that continue to allow me to do what I do and continue to manage themselves as well without me here a lot of the times. They've been so great in helping me out and continuing to do the work that God has called us to do.
You've already referenced it early on when you talked about if someone had told you, growing up in high school or whatever, that you'd be a pastor, mm-hmm. you'd see something was wrong. How do you handle the being in touch with people, maybe off and on over the years, who knew the other Rick, and now they know this Rick? Mm-hmm. Has there been any stories or encouraging things, challenging things, dealing with relationships from the past, that you're a different Rick than you used to be?
Well, I've definitely, I was not a very outgoing kid. So as far as I was pretty much in a shell. So as far as everyone's saying, I really didn't do anything that was, I don't want to say illegal, but, mm-hmm. anything that would be looked down upon or frowned upon or anything like that. I was pretty much a straight and narrow kid, but I was pretty shy too. So there wasn't, and for some reason, I never really allowed people to get too close to me. I always kept myself pretty private, and still kind of do. I'm kind of very guarded in that aspect. But some people, like if the people I served with in the service, they probably are kind of amazed that I've made it to this position. And I keep telling them the same thing that y'all keep telling them when you do your ministry, to God be the glory, because there's no other place that he obviously wanted me to be.
So how did Shy Rick turn into Pastor Rick, that you get in front of people and speak? Describe that process.
It's something about the microphone, I think. I don't know what it is. There's something God puts in these microphones that just allows me to open up and then tell people what I believe they need to hear, and whether it's what they want to hear or not, that's up to them for them to decide. But I don't know. It's got to be the Holy Spirit or something that, my will to do the best that I can do for what I am been called to do. Then that Jesus is still here, that Jesus is still relevant, and he's still willing to be a part of everyone's life and to be the backbone of what they do.
Pastor Rick Schmieg of First Presbyterian Church in Montrose, Pennsylvania, thanks so much for time. God never wastes anything, and all your experiences that you described during your life, he certainly uses them and continues to use them. And I know someone listening right now has heard your story and been encouraged, and know that God never gives up on us, does he? No, for God, no, not at all. And no matter how far down that you think you are, no matter how far down you are on this path of life, there's always someone that we can turn to for comfort and for strength and for guidance, and know that we are always in his loving arms, no matter what challenges face our way. Thank you, Pastor Rick. Appreciate your time.
Oh, Steve, I appreciate your time. God bless you all and everything you guys continue to do. It's great.
You've been listening to episode 23 of The Calling, a Family Life original podcast. Be sure to click the subscribe button to get notified when future episodes are available. And if you think others will be encouraged by this podcast, you can share it on social media. Family Life's original podcasts, such as the Parable Podcast, Therese Talk, If That Makes Sense, 10 Minutes With, and the Rise Up Podcast, can be found at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or FamilyLife.org. Family Life is listener-supported, and your faithful partnership makes ministry outreach through podcasts like this possible. Find out more at FamilyLife.org.